I'm super excited to introduce our next guest on the show. He is a Canadian comedy legend, and not just in Canada now, but worldwide. He started his comedy career at the young age of 19, playing almost every Yuck Yucks in Ontario, and was mentored by people like George Carlin, and has now sold out audiences and arenas around the world, including the Air Canada Centre, as well as his latest conquest in Dubai. Please welcome to our program, Mr. Russell Peters.
Well, thanks for having me, Enrique.
Well, you know what? It's strange because you had me on your show in your backyard. Now we're taking the show to your house again. And this is, I thought that opportunity was crazy, but to have you as a guest on a show for the CBC. You were just in Toronto.
Wait, this is for the CBC?
This is for the CBC.
Oh, I gotta go.
You gotta...
I thought this was global.
This is for the CBC. They've been kind enough. I feel like we tricked them into giving me a show. I don't know how it happened.
Well, it's called, they canceled Kim's Convenience. So
this is it?
they were short and Asian, so they hired a short Asian.
This is the buffer between the reboot of Kim's Convenience and While We Wait.
This is Flip's Inconvenience.
Yeah, it's convenience.
Convenience.
With the B. But this is it, man. For me, like, my family and I grew up watching your comedy. It wasn't just a me thing or my brother. The whole family was tuned in anytime you're on TV, no matter what channel you're on, any chance we could get. So thank you so much for the laughs over the years.
Well, thank you for tuning in, because without you, we would have one family less. And every family counts, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, growing up in Canada, we pretty much had everything the US had, entertainment-wise, comedy, and, we talked about your personal influences, but cartoon-wise, because, I have a feeling that you were probably a huge cartoon watcher as a kid.
Saturday morning, absolutely. It's funny for me, though, because I was like the Saturday morning cartoon guy. But I wasn't like the midweek cartoon.
The after school?
No, and I wasn't like the He-Man or the Masters of the Universe or G-Force or any of that stuff.
What was your jam?
Mine was Looney Tunes, which fortunately for us, that's what you do.
Yeah.
I loved Super Friends, Justice League.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like a comic book guy, but to me that 70s era of that was so funky looking, and Spider-Man had that like psychedelic thing about it, you know?
Yeah.
And Batman from the 60s, but obviously not a cartoon, but the Batman.
It's the closest thing to like a live action cartoon.
It was so awesome.
Yeah, moving forward. So if you're looking at that as like the 60s, 70s era, moving into the 80s, were you ever like exposed or aware of like things like G.I. Joe, Transformers?
Well, here's what happened, I think. People were tripping out in the late 60s and doing all these psychedelic drugs and expanding their world. And then those people moved into a position of creativity, and that's where the 80s came from. So the 80s was created by these people that were tripped out on psychs. They came up with the He-Man, they came up with the G.I. Joe, they came up with the Transformer. I'm almost sure Transformers had to come out of a psychedelic trip. Some guy was on mushrooms or acid, and he was looking at it, he was watching traffic, and he was like, that truck just turned into a robot, Like, there's no way you're sitting there and you go, what can I come up with? Oh, I know, a truck turns into a robot. No, you have to be high. I'm almost sure that all these started off as a joke.
Sure.
Wouldn't this be funny? And then bam, there it is, The 80s started that whole generation, that whole genre. And then, they started getting a little carried away with it at some point. Because, Transformers turned into a movie.
G.I. Joe, for sure.
G.I. Joe, toy turned into a movie. He-Man, toy turned into a movie.
Yeah, Masters of the Universe.
Masters of the Universe. Live the adventure.
And then Battleship.
Remember
Battleship turned into a movie?
Yeah.
We're going in.
That was, first of all, the shittiest game ever. And then it turned into a movie? Like, what the fuck is next? Light Bright, the movie? I don't want to see this.
That's gonna happen. Just because you said it now,
that's right.
Some executive is gonna call you up.
You sunk my battleship.
You guys want to go see Etch-a-Sketch, the movie? It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. the end, someone just picks up the movie screen and shakes it.
There's an earthquake. Oh my God, the movie's over.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And again, I'm super guilty of being part of the reboot era, but it's
Listen,
just
the reboot era I get.
Yeah.
To reboot animation and cartoons, it's a way of extending its life and giving our kids a chance to see something we saw in terminology they can understand.
We need a boost. A secret weapon.
Come on, man. Granny's out here having a martini at halftime.
Haters gonna hate.
But it's killing me and my bank account because I'm the sucker that goes, well, you know, I'm gonna show this to my kid, and then like literally something like Ghostbusters, which it's in my top 5 for sure, if not my favorite movie of all time. There's a new one coming out. They re-released in the same packaging, the 80s real Ghostbusters toys, and of course I'm like, I gotta get them.
Right.
I only had the one. I only had Egon.
Right, you
Harold
want
Ramis
it all.
character. Yeah, but now it's like...
I was at Target today with my brother, and we saw the Smokey and the Bandit car re-release, Matchbox, one of those, Hot Wheels or Matchbox, and it was amazing, so we bought it.
They got you.
$10. They're gonna get you on nostalgia. They're always going to get you on nostalgia.
Yeah.
I wanted a G.I. Joe in the 70s, one with the Kung Fu grip.
Right.
The one that had the real afro hair on it.
Yeah.
I wanted that, but my parents weren't gonna get that for me. It was too expensive. I had a Big Jim.
Yeah.
Do you remember Big Jim? You might be too young to remember Big Jim.
It's Big Jim's rescue rig, and you can buy Big Jim with a stocking field radio. Big Jim was on patrol when the rock slide shook, so he tells his men, I'm going in for a look. Then
Big Jim was another, like, he was like I don't know if he was like the knockoff G.I. Joe or whatever, but Big Jim came with this metal band that you could put around his muscle.
Yeah.
And if you bent his arm, the metal band snapped off to prove his bicep just got bigger.
What?
So I had like all the knockoff toys. I had Big Jim. I had Evil Knievel. I never had the Evil Knievel with the pump, like with the wind-up thing. I just had the doll.
Yeah.
And everybody loses the helmet, and then you just got this guy with no helmet, just like, eh.
He had a cape with no.
Yeah, and then, you know, for some reason, guys always took the clothes off there. I'm like, well, I don't know why I had a naked Evil Knievel. It was extra evil at that point. But yeah, G.I. Joe and Transformers and all that. That was like 84, 85. I was already 14, 15 years old.
You were past that.
I was already into breakdancing and DJing and boxing, so it was like, eh.
Yeah. But you kind of witnessed and at least from afar saw like the effects that had on that era of kids. And I mean, in the 80s, you know, like that was pretty much the Reagan era, and pretty much, as I recall as a kid, when we all kind of had money. Kind of like money to buy things, you know?
Well,
I mean, not me, but
my parents. I mean, we weren't poor, we just didn't have extra money.
Right.
And also I was of the age where they were like, if you want something, go get a job and buy it yourself, because we're not buying it for you.
14, get a paper route.
I had a paper route at 12.
Yeah.
I started working at 14 at the sub shop. and then I started at KFC when I was 15. So I started working right away.
Yeah.
Because my parents told me, we're not gonna buy you nothing.
Now, being a dad, has that translated into your kids? Like, are your kids into toys and stuff like that, and cartoons?
It's hard to say. This generation's very different. You know what I mean? Like, we were into cartoons because there was only certain things you could do back then, especially in the 70s. Like, you'd wake up Saturday morning. I'd wake up 7 a.m. for no damn reason. I would go downstairs. I'd have to be really quiet. Tiptoe downstairs, put on the TV, because you only had the one TV in the house back then. You thought you were living large if you had like a 22-inch TV,
right.
You know what I mean? And I would put the TV on. I'd have to be mindful of the volume, so I'd have to sit really close to listen to it. And I would put on the Saturday morning cartoons or Sunday morning cartoons. Sunday morning was funny because they had David and Goliath. Remember Davey and Goliath?
David and Goliath.
And but I didn't realize until I was older that it was like a religious propaganda show.
Davy, you know the Easter story.
It's about what happened to Jesus.
So they weren't selling toys on that show, but they were selling religion.
They were selling Jesus. Remember, it would be like the dog would be like, Davy, have you thought about Jesus today? And I'm like, in my head as a kid, even though I was raised Catholic, I remember as a kid going, that's a fucking stupid question to ask somebody. Have you thought about, who thinks about Jesus? Even as a kid, I'm like 8 years old going, dog, are you stupid?
Was that?
You're at a river. Why are you thinking about Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, I guess kids these days, I mean, you hear that expression all the time, but I'm the father of a 5-year-old, and like the tangible toys, like the water play toy outside,
Right.
and like the little car. So in a sense for me, like, I guess there is still hope that kids like to have tangible toys and like to use their imagination.
Yeah, well, that's what we bring to them. They're not actively pursuing. Remember, we'd see a commercial for something like, ooh, I want that. How am I going to get that? You know, whatever it was, you know, it'd be a mon-shishi. You'd be like, oh my God, I want a furry little mon-shishi.
Yeah.
You know?
They still exist, by the way. That's
Yeah.
still a brand that's out there.
Or a Tamagotchi or whatever it was at the
Right,
time. You know, you
yeah.
wanted Teddy Ruxpin, whatever you wanted, speak and spell. You would see the commercial like, ooh, and they'd make it look so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Or the action figures, they'd have these elaborate setups with like a fake jungle and water, and I'm like, where are they getting this from?
Yeah.
It's the big new way to bring the Joe team into action, and it floats on water.
Those play sets.
And I just end up throwing it in like the tub, and I'm like, oh, there's the pool. And then he's wet, and you fucked up your toy. Now he's gonna rust, and he's not gonna work anymore.
Yeah. The toy companies of the 80s almost were in that way selling their ideas to kids via cartoons. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like in the 80s especially.
Well, so you had the cartoon characters, you had the stories, and you gotta understand in the 70s, the cartoons we were watching weren't like new. They weren't like made at that moment, like especially Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies and all that. It wasn't written in the 70s. This stuff was written in the 40s and 50s. So we were watching things that were like dated, but it didn't really matter to us because at the time, entertainment was entertainment and funny was funny. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably what drew me to Super Friends and Justice League and all that, because I was like, oh, this is a little bit more modern. And then Scooby-Doo, that's a little bit more modern. You knew it was still a few years behind, but still it was a little bit more modern.
Yeah, I feel like there were not necessarily, well, I mean, more or less rules on what they could use cartoons for in the earlier years in the 60s and 70s. But then all bets were off when it came to like the 80s. So now we have companies like Mattel, Hasbro, Kenner that are kind of like able to make these like 30-minute kind of toy commercials. Do you remember like any of those, like watching them as a kid or seeing them at all like in programming?
Wasn't Mattel at one point, if not still, the largest manufacturer of clothes? They were the biggest manufacturer of clothing in the world.
Really?
Because of all the dolls and the
all the merchandise that comes
so they
from...
ended up making more clothing than just clothing companies. You know who used to work for Irwin Toys? Vince Vaughn's father.
Really?
Yes, Vince Vaughn's father was like a high-up guy at Irwin Toys, and Vince Vaughn grew up in
toy
Chicago.
mogul, like a toy executive?
Yeah, and so Vince was telling me that he grew up with every toy imaginable.
Wow.
His dad would just bring him home. What do you think of this?
He was like the ultimate test subject. He was the target audience test subject.
How cool is that?
Can you imagine Vince Vaughn playing with toys also?
I can imagine Vince Vaughn playing with toys, actually.
Yeah, Dad, just keep them coming.
Yeah.
I love that G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip.
Yeah, good
That's
grip.
Right, Dad.
Well, what kind of shitty grip is that, Dad? It's not really a Kung Fu grip.
He just always sounded like that. Were you ever like into Star Wars toys or anything?
Star Wars toys, I love Star Wars toys. Didn't like the movies, but I love Star Wars toys.
Right.
I don't know, there was something about the not fondling, but you know, playing with these toys, the little brown land speeder and the X-Wing fighter and the TIE fighter. Like, to me, only rich kids got those, because I'd only get like a little Luke Skywalker doll and then my friend's mom was like one of those, you know, they would say if you send in the proof of purchase, you can get a free, I remember back then it was Boba Fett. You can get a free Boba Fett back then.
Really?
Yeah, so my friend's mom knew how to mail it in. My parents were like, I don't know how to do all this. My parents were working on it. I couldn't even a fucking free toy, you know. So my friend's mom knew how to do it, so he would always get all the new free stuff. How'd you get that Boba Fett? Well, I got my mom mailed in the stubs, and I'm like, Mom, how do we mail in stubs? Don't worry about that. You're not mailing in any stubs.
They didn't want, not even for free.
Yeah, no, like that's why I always thought it was a scam.
Well,
even on cereal boxes, if you...
In a sense, it's like, buy more to get this one thing. Buy 6 of our things to get the one free thing.
Yeah, but then you still have to put the effort into it.
Of course.
Yeah, so again, with the cereals would do that too.
Yeah.
A cereal box would have like, they used to put the actual toy in the cereal.
Free inside.
Free inside. First, the toy was in the cereal itself.
Yeah.
Like in the middle of your cereal.
Just floating on
we'd get a box of cereal, and I remember sticking my hand right
in the
down
middle.
just to find the toy. Like just molesting all of this cereal. It was like a 12-year-old altar boy by the time I was done, just covered in filth. And then you pull out the toy, and then they got, I guess people complained, hey, this is unsanitary, unhygienic, and then they put the toy in a plastic bag in the cereal, and then somebody complained still, so they put it alongside the bag
on
in
the outside
bag.
between the box and the bag.
Yeah. And that's where it ended up. And then eventually they just stopped putting the toys in, and you had to mail it in to get it. And I was like, oh, that's whack. I don't want that.
Now it's like scan the QR code and download the app. It's crazy. And I mean, again, you could even look at cereal commercials as, I mean, Lucky the Leprechaun, the Trix Rabbit, Cookie Crisp. Who else was there?
Fruit Loops nose. I got reminded of that constantly. Literally, dudes, we'd walk, because I hung around the black guys, so we'd walking home, like, hey, how are we getting there? They'd all go, hey, follow his nose.
Oh, God.
And it'd be that kind of stuff. And so, there's a reason I became a comedian.
Now that era's come and gone, looking at today, like, I mean, I'm guilty again. I'm a part of all these reboots and remakes. I mean, you're going to be in Velma.
Yeah, I'm a voice on Velma. I'm in the new Clifford movie.
Clifford?
Yeah, that's coming out like
in a few weeks.
I remember that was done for. Had that been another?
We shot it in 2019.
I was gonna say another pandemic holdback, but now it's safe to go back out there.
We're the James Bond of children's movies. Without being James Bond.
You're gonna top them all, man.
We hope. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's huge. Who do you play in Clifford?
I play Malik the Magician.
It's Malik the Magnificent now. I'm going to magic school. Hey, do you want to see a trick?
Sure.
Okay, deck of cards.
Fantastica.
So you're a magician.
So what happened was when they gave me the role, they said, you're gonna be a magician, and we have an actual magician on set to teach you magic so you can do the magic properly. And the magician on set is this guy named Steve Cohen. He's a phenomenal magician. But he's a real deal magician. He's not like, here, where's my thumb? Not one. He's like a real legit guy. And then he was trying to teach me magic. I was like, come on, dude, you really gotta focus on this. I go, I gotta be honest with you, Steve. I'm friends with a lot of really good magicians, and I said my buddy Jay Sankey's name, who in the magician world is like saying Mel Blanc's name in your world.
Yeah.
I know Jay Sankey. How do you know Jay Sankey? Jay Sankey, well, that's amazing. I mean, because Jay Sankey's this magician who creates magic. He's a Canadian guy, actually.
Yeah.
He creates magic and sells it to magicians. Like he's an inventor of illusions and tricks.
That's insane.
Right. So I was like, Steve, I love magic. I love watching it. I really dig it. But because I love it and appreciate it, I know I can't do it. But I also know, because I've had Jay try to teach me magic back in the day, that it's not, I just don't have the dexterity for it. I don't have the flair for it.
The finesse.
Right. So we came up with a backstory for my character that I used to work on Wall Street, and I recently gave up my job, a high-paying job, to pursue my dream of being a magician, and that I'm just not a good magician. So that's what made it funny. I sold it to the director. I was like, isn't that funny? He goes, that is very funny. Let's do that. I was like, whew, now I don't have to study magic anymore. I was doing anything I could to not have to do more work than necessary.
So I was gonna say, so now you're a magician in the movie that doesn't do magic, or you still do a little bit?
I still try, like it's like a joke,
Yeah.
But at the end, I pull off one really cool magic trick.
Hey, when I get really good at magic, you know what I'm gonna do?
Make her disappear?
No, I'm gonna cut her in half.
Oh, or that.
That's cool. In a sense, you were part of like a children's book, a popular children's book series character that also had a life in cartoon form.
Yes. Now I used to read the Clifford books.
So did I.
When I was a kid, and they were like this big, and they were like a floppy book.
Yeah.
And I would look at it again. I liked the bright colors, and the way they drew Clifford was so good. But the cartoon of Clifford, he looked more burgundy.
Yeah.
It was more Clifford the big burgundy dog in the cartoon.
Right.
And I think we nailed it this time.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that, and I really do hope, for the sake of the movie and consumerism in animation, that you guys sell a lot of toys.
I certainly hope so.
Will you get your own action figure?
Listen, if they gave me my own action figure, I would be so happy and honored.
Isn't that the dream?
That
to
really
one
is to
day-
become an action figure.
to work on something and then have. I mean, if you go to my house, it's people like I lose more dates that way, inviting them into the toy room because it's all the things that I've ever done.
Well, no, if it's stuff you did, then it's cool.
They're like, "Is this your son's stuff?" I'm like, "No."
No, that was me. That was me. And then they're like, "Wait, what are you doing with a Cabbage Patch doll?" Nothing to worry about that. I love cabbages. I have a coleslaw fetish.
Well, going back to consumerism and animation and cartoons, what do you think of like what the future is as far as Well,
the thing that bugs me out about cartoons now is that they're too lifelike. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like they're dealing with like real problems now, which I get the idea is message, but I like the whole escape of cartoons and animation. Mm-hmm. I like the whole
the mindless cartoons,
the completely mind-numbingly dumb things that we watched growing up. I liked when the Roadrunner would paint a tunnel and Coyote would run into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I love that stuff. I love that Pepe Le Pew was just a degenerate, pervert, predator. But I didn't know. Like, have you ever seen one predator, rapist type guy in court go, "It was Pepe Le Pew who made me this way. This is the reason I'm out here fucking cats with a stripe." You know what I mean? Like,
people often forget the original. Like all the shorts, the first 2 minutes of that cartoon setup, and if you're a comedian, you'll get the setup. People need to remember the setup. They always remember the bad things. He spends the first minute or two walking past flowers, and the flowers are like this guy
dying,
stinks.
wilting. Yeah.
He walks past construction workers, and they're like, "Le Pew, le skunk," and they're like, he stinks. So the whole thing is that he's repulsive because he smells, and no one wants to be hugged by a skunk.
Right.
No matter what. I certainly don't. But then again, of course, maybe his execution in the romance side, aside from being stinky.
Well, I think the funny part is that they made him French.
The conquest of Everest will pale into insignificance. We shall ascend the Matterhorn of...
So really, I think only the French people should be upset by this, not the rest of us. I get it if I was French, I'm like, "Hey man, that's messed up." I'm Indian, I'm supposed to be offended by Apu. I get it.
But I feel like there's room for reforming him in this modern age where you can have a character like Harlequin that is in a preschool show, a preteen show, an Adult Swim show, and
Harlequin?
a rated R movie. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, that character exists on different platforms for toddlers all the way up to 18 and up.
Right.
So who's to say you can't reform Pepe Le Pew in a more than children's realm? Like you could bring him to like an Adult Swim show. Russell, I can't thank you enough for just sitting here and reminiscing about the good old days and taking us back. And just appreciate you, man. Your comedy, your brain, and your time most of all. Hey guys, Eric Bauza here, the host of Stay Tuned. I hope you liked that video, and if you did, you might want to check out these videos. I don't know where to look. They're gonna put videos somewhere, right? Oh, and be sure to hit the subscribe button.